Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Mickey George. I am going to be the moderator for this panel. I have a novel published by HarperCollins called Speakeasy Speak Love, and two graphic novels and comics coming out. One is a standalone graphic novel from Legendary Comics that comes out this August called The Heart Hunter. And I also did the Enola Holmes comic adaptation. So to kind of get us started, what I'm going to do is have each of the panelists introduce themselves, maybe a little bit about why you're interested in this panel and qualified to talk about comics, and then also what is the one comic, graphic novel, or basic any graphic artwork that is your number one go-to recommend for someone who's just first starting out, one that you recommend the very most out of anyone. So Dan, why don't we start with you?
Sure. My name is Dan Haring. My background is in animation and video games. I worked in movies for a while, and I've also co-written a book and illustrated it called The Star Shepherd. Right now, I have a graphic novel on submission, so hopefully something happens with that. And I've just grown up loving and reading comics my whole life. A recommendation: my favorite artist, storyteller, and this is my favorite comic of all time. Darwin Cook is the creator. So if you're into superheroes at all, I would recommend The New Frontier by Darwin Cook.
Cool. Els, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Els Curtis. I have written 2 books and a graphic novel called Lenses. It's right here. It can be found on Amazon. And I am also currently editing and coloring a web comic on Webtoons called Bittersweet. I got into graphic novels because I'm both a writer and an artist, and I love the fact that we can meld these two things together and create graphic novels and comics. And my one that I would recommend for a new person who wants to get into comics, but they don't know what kind of comics they like, I suggest Girl Genius. It's a steampunk romance, adventure, time travel, pretty much everything. And it is amazing.
Great. What about you, Mike?
My background is in storyboards, concept design. I've worked with clients and all that, in advertising, etc. And then, of course, I have my own creator-owned comic called We Go Anywhere, about corporate power. A company does business in outer space. It's also on Webtoons as well. And, of course, I'm a student of the art form. Just for everyone here, the father of the graphic novel probably is Will Eisner. If you go all the way back, he was the one who originated it, and then we've been following his footsteps ever since.
Yeah, great. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about actually kind of jumps off of a little bit of what Mike was saying, because comics and graphic novels, as we know them, really have only been around for a century or so, and really they got their start when people started collecting cartoons that were in newspapers and periodicals and then selling them as collections. So that was the very first in the 1910s and 20s, and then the first superhero character, which is Superman, was created in the 1930s. And then superhero comics are kind of what sort of exploded into the golden age of comics, and kind of gave a jumping off point for what would later be graphic novels, and a lot of what Will Eisner did and stuff. So because that was a lot of kind of the foundation, I wanted to talk about superhero comics first. So if everyone kind of wanted to talk about maybe what their favorite superhero comic was and what is the one that they would recommend to maybe someone who is new to getting into that particular genre of comics. For me, even though they are definitely much newer, I always suggest Squirrel Girl and Miss Marvel, because I feel like even though they are new, that makes them easy to kind of dip your toes into the superhero world, because they're very much made for an audience that maybe doesn't have all the background of all the other Marvel and DC characters. So I usually recommend The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl and Miss Marvel as kind of maybe a jumping off point. But I'll let you guys talk about your favorite superheroes. I feel like, Dan, we might know what your favorite is just based on your background and everything that's around you. But you can go first again.
Oh, thank you. Els, I like your shirt. So,
Oh, thank you.
so like I mentioned, so yeah, Stan Lee, most people probably know who he is. He had a saying that every comic is someone's first issue. And so for a long time, that was kind of the idea that like you pick up an issue, any random issue, you want to be able to understand what's going on. And that's really hard to do nowadays. There's so much history with superhero comics that you pick up a random issue of Spider-Man or Batman or whatever, it probably tells a decent story, but it probably is part of a story, a 5 or 6 issue arc. And unless you grab the whole thing, you're not going to know what's going on. So that's kind of a stumbling block to superhero comics, like you mentioned. Whereas Miss Marvel and Squirrel Girl, they've got more self-contained, less continuity in history. So one of the reasons I do recommend this is it kind of goes over the story of DC Comics, those characters. It kind of retells the story of going from Silver Age to, from Golden Age to Silver Age and kind of that transition. And if you have any passing understanding of the characters, you can pick up that comic and read it and understand it. So that's one I would highly recommend. Otherwise, if you're interested in a character, I would recommend doing some research and grabbing like a trade paperback, because usually those contain a single story arc. So that way you're not grabbing some random issue and being lost.
Cool. What's your favorite Batman collection?
That's hard.
People always tell me it's Dark Knight Returns, so I was just wondering if you agreed with that or not.
It's not my favorite. Of the Year One and Dark Knight, which are kind of the bookends of Frank Miller, I definitely like Year One better. Dark Knight Returns is fantastic, but I really enjoy the early Batman stuff. So Year One, Long Halloween, those kind of stories that are kind of the very beginning of his career.
Cool. All right, I'll let you go next. Els?
Okay. I actually have to disagree with you about the comics recently, or that they've only been recently. We have ancient comics in the pyramids. Stories were told with pictures in ancient Egypt. And our first superheroes were mythology. Hercules and Thor and everything, which is why we have the Thor comics. And I love mythology because you can actually see a connection between the tales of the past coming more to life with Superman and Batman and everything. And my favorite superhero is Batman too. I don't have a cool bat cave, but actually suggest Batman Adventures. I grew up watching the animated series, and these are just a continuation of it. I also suggest Batman meets Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's a little silly, but it really spoke to me on so many levels.
Yeah. What about you, Mike? Do you have a favorite superhero one that you would recommend?
Well, I was sucked into that whole world with Spider-Man. Back Gary Conway was writing and gave more of an adult tone to it. And that's where the death of Gwen Stacy and the death of the Green Goblin and all that took place. But my favorite in terms of graphic novels, and this was Marvel's first introduction into it, was The Death of Captain Marvel by Jim Starlin. And took a real deep approach, I guess, into what it means to die, But that was also Marvel's first attempt at doing graphic novels, and then tons of other stuff followed after that. So,
yeah, that's. I've also heard a lot of good things about some of the earlier Spider-Man arcs too. So, cool. Okay, so let's kind of maybe jump up a little bit in history, though I do really like your point, Els, that we've been telling stories with pictures for a really long time, and actually probably before we told stories with words. So it is a really good point. And I think that, so I guess you can kind of correct me again if I'm wrong. But we got, like, I think Mike is totally right about Will Eisner, is that he kind of really set the foundation for graphic novels. But it was only kind of more in the late 80s and 90s that we started getting serialized comics that weren't superheroes. So basically different stories, but that were still ongoing and still came out in serialized issues rather than a standalone graphic novel or a contained volume like Mouse and some of Will Eisner's early works. So my recommendation for a non-superhero serialized comic is Saga, which is Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. And that is actually the series that got me back into modern comics and graphic novels. I loved it so much that I found myself like hungrily looking for like all these other things. And I really think that Saga is an example of a writer and an artist who are both at the top of their game, coming together at just the right time to create this really cool story. And it's not for, it is got a lot of mature content, I would say. So if that is something that you avoid or whatever, then, proceed with caution. But I love Saga. It's halfway completed. We don't know when like the next half will be done. But that is the one that I usually recommend. So let's go maybe in a different order this time. Do you want to start, Els, with your favorite non-serialized or non-superhero serialized comic?
Sure. I did suggest Girl Genius. That's one of my favorite. Another one that I really enjoy is they're Greek myths in graphic novels, and the art is gorgeous. And the one thing I love the most is that the creator did the research. He actually has resources in the back. He went and looked for everything he could find, and I really appreciated it because he really went in depth with one of my favorite gods from Olympus and really brought out who she is, Hera. I feel that she is a lot misunderstood and often a villain in modern retellings of Greek myths.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually went into how she was not a god of vengeance. She was of marriage and childbirth, and she kind of was given a pretty crappy deal married to Zeus. And he kind of told about how, like, back in the days they had lots of festivals for Hera and people worshipped her on a loving scale instead of feared her.
Yeah. So I know you said that you had a webtoon. Have you read Lore Olympus then? Because I really
I have, and when we talk about webcomics, I will talk more about what I found on webtoons.
Okay, great. Yeah. I like the treatment of Hera in Lore Olympus too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about you, Mike? Do you like any serialized but non-superhero works?
I don't think I have enough time to talk about them all here. It's great to talk about the stuff. There's been some great stuff in the past few years. Eric Shanor did something on Greece called the Age of Bronze. Paul Gutley has gotten into the historical comics with the Aztec Empire. And one of the most favorite non-serialized or non-superhero comics to me of all time is ElfQuest. We've been used to all the superhero storylines, their superpowers and all that, but ElfQuest is about leadership. It's about sacrifice. It's about family. It's all the things that really make a great story. And over that first 20 issue arc, they really get into a great storyline about where the characters came from. And it's a non-superhero genre, but they were one of the pioneers in that, along with Sim with Cerebus. And it's just a great stuff that's out there. Superhero stuff, love it, but I love all the other new stuff that's.
Yeah. And actually what you're saying reminds me, I know that we're moving kind of fast through some of these things, but there's so much. So what if for anyone who's listening to this panel too, I am going to contact all the panelists again and kind of compile a list of everything that we talked about. So if you feel like you can't like write them down fast enough, and then it will also give you guys panelists, if there's something you think of after that you would have recommended that we didn't talk about, feel free to add it to the list and we can send it to anybody who wants it, who's listening to this panel.
I'll also post in the Discord channel my link to my webtoons, or the webtoons
great.
comic that I work on.
Yeah, that would be great. And you too, Mike. So anyway, sorry, Dan, go ahead with your.
No, you're fine. Like Mike said, there are just so many out there. One of my favorites is Hellboy. I would be drawn to these comics even just because of Mike Mignola's art. It really speaks to me. I love it, but he's a great storyteller too. If you've seen the movies, maybe don't judge it based off those. Definitely check out.
I love the movies.
I enjoyed them, but they definitely have some issues, I would say. But but he's just a great storyteller, and his use of shadow and contrast is amazing. And then another one of my favorites, It Has Ended, but Bone by Jeff Smith. It's an all ages book, but it is not for kids. Well, I mean, it's not geared towards kids. It's all ages, so your kids can read it, but it's just an amazing epic fantasy, and it has so much going on. And his artwork, there's a colored version, but it's just black and white, but his art is amazing. So those are two I would highly recommend.
Yeah, something I really like about Bone when I first read it, and what I particularly paid attention to, is there's no narration in Bone. Like, it's all the art and dialogue, like speech balloons. And it's just sort of like a master class in showing the story instead of like telling you everything. So it's really great.
Definitely, so good.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to graphic novels in particular. And the definitions between like comics and graphic novels do get a little hazy, and a lot of those lines overlap for sure. But generally speaking, and again, there are a few exceptions to this. Usually when somebody's talking about comics, it is serialized, like there's issues and then volumes and collected volumes that are coming out, and there's sort of an arc. And graphic novels, even if there's more than one volume, like with Mouse, or Faith Erin Hicks just did a graphic novel trilogy, so there's 3 books. The stories are contained in books, and you don't have to hit a certain number of pages per chapter, per issue. A lot of memoirs are graphic novels because they're, really experimental with the art and the panels, and there's all that kind of stuff. So that's usually what I tell people is the main difference, is one is serialized, one is kind of self-contained. So again, talk about as many as you want, because this again is a really broad category. My number one first recommendation for graphic novels is Nimona by Noelle Stevenson, who's also the showrunner for She-Ra. But I love that one, and I always feel confident giving it to people, even if they don't like graphic novels. They usually walk away having loved that one. The art is really accessible, and it's funny, and like got a really kind of sincere meaning. And just there's so many, but I'll let you guys first. Mike, I'm actually going to start with you this time because you mentioned Will Eisner, and I think he's a great jumping off point talking about graphic novels.
So you want to talk about Will Eisner?
Or if you want to, or you can talk about any of your favorite graphic novels.
Well, we'll just go through a brief laundry list. Got a great one. He's got several, of course, but one's called The Dreamer. And what it does is it gets into how the industry was back in the early pioneering days. And so that's just fantastic. It's sort of a mirror story of his own experience in it. I'm thinking of other ones, more recent, like March. If you haven't seen that one, by
I love that one.
That is really outstanding graphic work, and it's an introduction to what really happened with the civil rights movement. And of course, Mouth is another great one. Road to Perdition. A lot of people don't know that was a graphic novel by Max Allan Collins, and I'm just not thinking of their artist, but the work that the illustrator did for that. sequentially and in style was just groundbreaking. So that's my some of my top ones though. So
Yeah, great. What about you, Dan?
A couple of mine are, I'm going to talk about Darwin Cook again. He's my favorite artist, but Richard Stark, his Parker books, and Darwin did 4 of these before he passed away, and he took them and did them in graphic form, and he's just an incredible storyteller. They are for adults or for a more mature audience, but I love his style, love his stuff. As far as all ages, First Second puts out some amazing stuff, and one of them is This Was Our Pact. I love this book. It just got announced that they're doing a movie based on this book, and it's a really fantastic story. Highly recommend that one.
Do you know
And
if it's going to
then,
be, sorry, I'll let you keep going. Do you know if This Is Our Pact is going to be animated or live action? Because when I read This Is Our Pact, I was like, this feels like a Studio Ghibli movie to me, is what it felt like.
I didn't see any distinction. I'm kind of guessing it would be animated, but
right.
Who knows? Maybe a live action with visual effects as well.
Okay.
And then if you have younger readers, you can't go wrong with Raina Telgemeier. They probably already read most of her books, but she's fantastic as well.
What about you, Els?
Okay, so I'm a big bibliophile, and anytime an author brings out their book as a graphic novel or has additional material as a graphic novel, I jump on it. And I was so happy. My favorite book, The Last Unicorn by Peter Bagel, was turned into a graphic novel. The art is amazing. I love it so much. Another one I suggest, it's actually 3, but I consider it one book, is White Sand by Brandon Sanderson. If you look at it, the panels are not right angles. All of the panels are in like crazy angles, and I noticed that as an artist, and I was like, that is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I like, so kind of talking about the adaptations, like you said, like The Last Unicorn, and they did like the Graveyard Book, and publishers are starting to do classics, like The Great Gatsby, and
we have a Wrinkle of Time.
Artemis Fowl.
Yeah, A Wrinkle in Time. Yeah, they just did A Wrinkle in Time, and they're doing all these classics. And I know a lot of parents, because I also work at the Salt Lake City Public Library, and they don't like their kids to read graphic novels all the time. Not that they don't like them to, but to them it's not real reading. And I try to tell them that I'm like, if you have a reluctant reader, graphic novels are the very best thing that you can give them, because the pictures provide context for the words that they don't know. So they learn vocabulary, they learn visual language, which is so important in like our digital age where so many things are like visual, instead of like long blocks of text. And also just they get so invested that they don't realize how much they're reading, and their reading comprehension still like improves. So there's like so many benefits to reading graphic novels.
That's really frustrating to me, because so my wife teaches school. She teaches 3rd through 5th grades, and you know, some of these readers, they'll sit and read Smile over and over, or they'll read the Amulet series or Zeta the Space Girl over and over, and it's like, on one hand, it's like, well, maybe they should read something harder, but on the other hand, they're reading and they're enjoying it, and if you shame them for what they're reading and say, oh, it's not real, whatever, how are you expecting them to go on to real books that they're, just let them read what they enjoy. So I have a bone to pick with that whole mentality.
Yeah.
Not to mention, graphic
absolutely.
novels do have hard concepts for kids in there too, and hard words. I mean, like reading Calvin and Hobbes, it looks like it is for kids, but there's huge words and philosophy in there, and you learn so much just by watching a kid play with his pet tiger.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Dan's point, I think that if that is like, it's like preferring fantasy over realism. Like, it's just, if that's what you like, reading, as long as reading is still a pleasant experience for you, like it's something you enjoy and you love. That's the main point. So, yes. Okay. So we're gonna kind of diverge a little bit and talk about manga. And that is its own. I mean, I'm super condensing here because manga could be its own panel by itself. But it got really big between 1950 and 1969 in Japan, and then we started getting translations over here in the States. But they had, at the time, there was, if you guys know, then feel free to correct me, but I think it's, I think I wrote it down maybe even. Like shonen was aimed for boys and shoujo was aimed for girls. And of course, nowadays it's like read whatever you want, like read, what you like. But at the time, they were like put in these two gendered categories. And Astro Boy, which premiered in 1952, was like the big money maker for the shonen. And then the Princess Knight was one of the huge ones for shoujo. So those are two of the classic mangas. And of course, nowadays, there's a lot of manga, but a lot of it has been made into anime. So it's hard to, so when I was thinking about my favorite manga, most of it I found because it was an anime first and I wanted to read of it. But my favorite is a story that hasn't been made into an anime that I know of, at least that's been English or translated into English yet, is called The Girl from the Other Side. And it's the atmosphere of that manga is just lovely. And it's about this little girl who, one side of this like fantasy village is there's monsters who can curse anyone by touching them. And the other side is like the village of humans. And this little girl is on the side of the monsters. And so she has this like monstrous guy who she calls teacher, who like leads her on. And the book is kind of about unraveling the mystery of why she's on the side of the monsters. It's very lovely and so slow paced. And the art is so atmospheric. So that one is my favorite. So if you guys read manga or like it, feel free to talk about your favorite. So that's, yeah, I don't know. So it's one of those things where manga gets grouped into graphic novels, but it's really its own separate, like it is sequential art, but it's also its own art form to me. I don't know.
It has a specific style to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know if you read manga, Dan, or if you have any like recommendations or thoughts, then we'll go around.
I haven't read a ton. I've read, most recently, I read a volume of Attack on Titan and then Battle Angel Alita. After I watched the movie, I'm like, oh, I should check this out. And I read the first volume. A lot of similarities. I'm reading one right now that my daughter bought, and it's called Hollowfields. And it's a really fun one. I'm only about a third of the way through it. This collection collects 3 of the volumes. So if you get this one, I guess you'll get the whole story. But I would recommend that one. I'm still pretty new to manga. I know there's a lot out there. Like Mickey was mentioning, like I love Nausicaa, the movie, and I want to check out the manga eventually. I just haven't had the chance. There's a lot of films that I really enjoy that started out, like she mentioned, as manga. So I still have a lot of education to go as far as that.
Yeah, me too. Els, what about you?
I actually started collecting manga before comic books
Cool.
because I lived in a small town and we didn't have a comic book store. We didn't have a bookstore. And it wasn't until my older sister moved to Salt Lake that we got into anime, and she showed me where to buy manga. And my first manga was called Demon Diary. It was actually from Korea instead of Japan, but like just the art and being able to tell a story that continues through multiple volumes really got to me. And my favorite mangas right now that are currently still running are Natsume's Book of Friends, which is it's very pretty, and like the story is touchy-feely, teenage boy trying to help spirits find their names and go on cute little adventures with them. And then Skip Beat, which is a rom-com about a girl trying to get back at her ex-boyfriend. And I have a couple from a long time ago. These ones are older. Mermaid Saga. It's a horror. It's kind of not for kids. Pet Shop of Horrors. Kind of like, is it Gremlins, where you go to a pet store and you get a pet with rules. It's also horror and also not for children. And this one is probably the most in-depth storyline I've ever read. Please Save My Earth. It involves reincarnation and aliens, and it's just so beautiful.
Wow, great. Yeah, I haven't read any of those, but you make me want to read all of them. So,
I'll put the list on the room when
Okay.
the panel's over.
Yeah. What about you, Mike? Do you have anything to add?
Oh, yes. Lone Wolf and Cub is an older manga, but it's one of the finest forms of graphic literature. It is also pretty explicit in terms of its violence, but in terms of the sequential narrative, the illustrators and the writing, it goes during the period of feudal Japan. It really is without peer. It first came the first comics edition, and then also Dark Horse published anthologies of it. There are the others, of course. Silent Service is another one that was done in the periodicals. It was really outstanding. And then, of course, everyone knows about the movie, but they may not know that Akira was an outstanding graphic novel. So those things, and of course, we've got Attack on Titan, as Dan mentioned. There's others like Bleach, Naruto, Tokyo Ghoul that are now some of the groundbreaking manga out there.
Yeah. And became like super popular anime too. Anyway, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Els.
For those who want to get into manga or are suggesting to manga, I really would like to tell you that manga comes in their own genres, and I would be very careful about picking up the most popular, like Bleach and Naruto. And I had a conversation with my friend about this. If you have a friend that likes romance or cutesy stuff, don't recommend that they read Full Metal Alchemist. That will break them. Manga has some very weird and very tense subjects, and a lot of them are not for all audiences.
Well,
Yeah.
I want to jump in there because even with the anime, like Speed Racer, they had to edit a lot of stuff when it was syndicated here in America. A lot of the violence and stuff. So,
Oh, and Sailor Moon too.
right, they don't have those kind of controls over there, and so when it comes to content, yeah, you've got to take a look because they don't deal with a lot of the censors that we have here in the States.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, I think those are all really good points. And I think maybe when we put together our list that we'll kind of send out, we can give you like, hey, if you like more lighthearted, fun, maybe romantic stuff, go here. But if you're into like a serious, maybe are okay with some like darker themes and some like violence, then you can check out these. And these are maybe some to give like the teenagers or the kids in your life. And we can kind of separate them out because that is a really good point. There's a lot of genres. And there's a lot of, I don't want to say like weird stuff, but like interesting. Like it's like it really stretches the boundaries of what those genres are, which I think is really cool. But if you're not expecting it, it can kind of throw you off if it's like the first manga that you've ever read.
Well,
there's a cultural barrier with manga. Like the Japanese see things differently than a European point of view. And one thing I liked about manga is that all of them have a rating on the back. And pay attention to that rating because they're fairly accurate.
Well, I just want to jump into it. They cover all genres. I mean, for a while, the States, it was all superhero stuff, but they've been doing historical comics, even sports comics. They cover all the genres in Japan. And that's what's great about manga.
Yeah,
there's
agreed.
something for everyone in manga.
Yeah, and it really, like I said, it could be its own panel because there's like so many like different kinds. Okay, so before I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, but before we go into questions, the last kind of subset of graphic novels and comics that I wanted to talk about was web comics. And webcomics are really interesting because there's several platforms that you can read stuff on apps like Webtoons, for example, or Tapas, where the formatting is designed to be scrolled through on your phone. But a lot of original webcomics, they were full pages that were on Tumblr and you just read them like on your web browser. And some of them are still like that. There's ones that I have really enjoyed that they're online and they're interactive. Like there's animations and there's like things that you can click on to send you to different places in the story. So it's also a very wide field and yet also new because the internet, really, it's only been since the 90s since things have been put online. And I said something about Homestar Runner the other day, and my 21-year-old coworker was like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh, it's so like things move so quickly." I'm like, "Hi, I can't believe you don't know." Like
We've
yeah,
had to introduce our
early
kids to
20s.
Trogdor the Burninator, so they know who Trogdor is at least.
Good. You're doing the good work. Yeah. So anyway, so it's a very big, broad field. Some of my favorites are Heartstopper, which is sort of like a queer contemporary love story, which started on Tumblr but has now been made available on Webtoons and Tapas. If you want to get either of those apps. I also like Lore Olympus and Castle Swimmer on Webtoons. I used to really love Kate Beaton's Heart Vagrant comics, which she stopped making now. But they were like historical parody comics that she put online, and I used to really love those. So those are some of my favorites, but I want to give everyone time to talk. So I'll start with you so you can talk about your webtoon too, and then we'll go back around again.
Okay, so I help out with a comic called Bittersweet. It's a fairy tale retelling, kind of a gag-a-day story. My friend, H.A. Camp, she writes it. I color and edit for her. And I love webtoons. That's where I go for webcomics, and I find it easy for a reader to find good stuff, but the one problem I have with it is that Webtoons has two separate places for comics. They have comics that they actually paid the writers and artists to make, and then they have people who don't make any money or very little money based on click or how many clicks they get. And it's really hard to find those people unless they are very, very popular. They might get an advertisement every now and then. So if you are looking for a place if you want to write webcomics, you want to make a webcomic, Webtoons is easy, it's right there, and if you already have a fan base, it's easy for them, but if you're looking for an audience, it's very hard to get people to read your stuff unless you have some other way to bring an audience in. My favorite comics on there. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you a question to kind of tag on what you're talking about. Because I've also heard people, like, I agree with you. So if you're on the Canvas side of Webtoons, which it's not, Webtoons isn't paying you to do it and you don't have an editor, so you have to find that. But I have heard from other people that even though it's still hard to find an audience, it's even harder to just post your webcomic online with no traffic whatsoever except your fan base. Like at least Webtoon has so many users that are logging in every day. So there's already people there who could potentially find it. And I've heard that it's easier to find an audience with Tapas or Webtoon for that reason, because if you just post it like on your blog, for example, nobody's going there already except, the people who are already your fans.
I guess I should have made it clear. Anyone who posts a webcomic and they have no social media presence at all, no one's going to find you. You need to have a social media presence or start working on one. Yeah, I found lots of people who went from DeviantArt or Tumblr and went to Webtoons. So and that's where people go to look specifically for webcomics, unlike other social media platforms. So all I'm saying is that it's very hard to get an audience because the market is being like people are just pushing lots of webcomics into
Uh, can you
onto the
can
internet.
you tell everyone which bittersweet you are on Webtoon? Because I like looked it up and there's several like speaking of like it being like a convoluted because
Yeah, it's a pretty common name. I'm posting the link
okay, great.
on
That would be great.
on the chat room
Okay,
right
great.
now.
Okay, so I'll
Yeah,
let you
and
keep going by your favorites.
yeah, my favorites, one on Canvas, it's called Punderworld. It's a retelling of Hades and Persephone, much like Lore, but it's a lot more PG because Lore deals with some pretty hard subjects, and she does it well. Whoever, I can't remember her name who writes it,
Rachel
but
Smythe. Mm-hmm.
yeah, but she does it well, and her Lore, the art in it is stylized. It's a specific style, but Punderworld, I actually think that her art is much more pretty. I like Curse Princess Club. That one's hilarious. The Remarried Empress. There's a lot of them that I like on there. I have a ton. But just like with manga, if you have a genre that you're looking for, get on Webtoons or Tapas and you can find your genre.
What about you, Mike? Do you have any web comics that you like?
Well, my book is on Webtoons, and Webtoons is an emerging market. It has a $328 million valuation. And it generally is pretty heavy on the manga style, but it's been a good home for my book. I think some like 27 episodes. A lot of people don't know this. You can do it in panels. It has a scroll format, but I load the whole pages on there on each episode, and it works just fine. And it allows for a little creator note. It gives you a understanding of how many people have gone on to view your book, and if you're looking to monetize it, you can do that by tying it into a Patreon account. So it's pretty effective. I think there's a couple of U.S. counterparts, but they're nowhere near the audience that Webtoons has, and it's been a pretty good home for my book so far. And of course, I've got the hard copy version of it anyway. So
Cool. What was it called again?
We Go Anywhere.
Oh, we got it. Cool.
This in outer space, corporate power in outer space, and so those are the things exploring it. Yeah.
What about you, Dan?
I don't read a whole ton of webcomics. I need to more. I'm kind of scared to go down to that rabbit hole because I already have too little time. But
Right.
one webcomic I really enjoy is Jake Wyatt's Necropolis. I think he's just has it on his own website, and I know him through animation. He works in animation as well. And then I really enjoy humor ones like The Oatmeal or Cyanide and Happiness. There's one Sarah Scribbles by Sarah C. Anderson that I really enjoy. So I'll just kind of when they pop up, I'll read them. I'll read a few, but it's not something that I like know a lot about.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes some of the ones that are not a continuous story, but are like Sarah Scribbles or the Oatmeals, where they're kind of one-offs, sometimes those are more successful because you don't have to like keep up with this like really complicated storyline. Anyway, sorry,
Right.
Mike, I cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to say, Brian, you mentioned Brian came on with Saga. He has a web comic. It's something to do. What's the name of it? It's escaping me. It's something to do with detectives. Crime comic. Anyways, a lot of the creators now that you all used to are now getting to web comics as well. And of course, Comixology is another digital platform where you can sell your books on with Comixology.
Right.
Yeah. And Comixology is nice because you don't have to adhere to that kind of scroll format. Like you said, if you don't want to, you can just do the panels, and it's like the same as having a ebook through,
That's right.
Kindle's program, except for comics. So yeah, that is a way to do kind of like a self-published comic, which is yeah, that's a good point. Do you guys have anything to add that you want people to know about reading comics and graphic novels? We only have a few minutes, so I kind of want to give everyone maybe just a last chance to say anything else, and then I don't know if we'll have time for questions, but.
Well, I'll just jump in. Others that may be obvious and some that aren't. Watchmen is one of the more obvious ones. It was a 12-page series, but it's been collected in hardcover annotated format. Let's see, Persepolis is another one out there, great graphic novel. And Powers, another one by Michael Bendis, which is a real groundbreaking book. So there's just a ton of stuff out there. East versus West, that's another serialized format that is really, I think, breaking some ground. So there's just a ton of stuff out there. Look up the top 10 comics, graphic novels, and you're just going to be open to a whole host of reading material, keep you busy for quite some time. So
Yeah. There's no shortage of stuff to read for sure.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is the stigma between comic books is people think, oh, they're for kids or they're only superheroes. But
right.
it's like animation. It's not a genre. There are any genre you can think of can be found within this medium. So if you like horror, if you like fantasy, sci-fi, just whatever it is, romance, you can find that in comic book form. And it's a wholly unique form where you are combining words and pictures and nothing else does it that way. So I think it's fantastic, and I think if people can get over maybe the prejudice they might have against it, they'll really enjoy it.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, I'm just going to recommend a few other books that I have. I have my collection right here, and I didn't get to a couple of them. So one kind style of graphic or comic that we didn't cover is like the Sunday comics, the Gag a Day. Sorry, my toddler's trying to come in here. Go on. Nope. Okay. He might join us right now. Come here. Okay, so this one is called Phoebe and Her Unicorn. It's Peter Beagle actually recommended it. Yeah. And
that's a great one.
It's got a Calvin and Hobbes style. It's really cute. I love it. This is Disney princesses. We have single issue comics. They're so cute. Really good for younger kids. Also, another Batman one, Gotham Academy. Like, I picked it up and I thought it was like, when I picked it up, I was like, this is fan fiction in comic book form. But it turned out really good. It turned out amazingly well done. I also like Teen Titans, and I love the Gargoyles, and I was so happy that Greg Weisman was able to bring out the rest of his story in graphic novels. That's great. And on the Marvel side, I really like Civil War. That whole series is wow. Like the Wolverine one is my favorite because he literally gets exploded to nothing but his skeleton and his brain. And he heals back from that.
Wow.
Well, and also Steve McNiven's artwork on the main storyline of Civil War is just astounding.
Yeah, groundbreaking stuff. Yeah.
Great, awesome. So if there's anything that you still didn't get to recommend, which again, there's so much, we'll try to compile something, and then anyone who wants that list of stuff that we like put together for each of these kind of categories and whatever. But I think what Dan said is spot on. Anything that you want to find, you can probably find, and it's really wonderful. So if you're new to it, I'm like almost jealous of you because there's all this great stuff that you get to read. So I think that's it. I think we're out of time.
Well, thanks for moderating the panel.